We're into party conference time. Catapulted into government, the Liberal Democrats have been meeting here in Liverpool. Welcome to Question Time. And on the panel with me tonight, the Liberal Democrat Secretary of State for Business, Vince Cable, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister, John Redwood, Caroline Flint for Labour, the New Statesman Senior Editor, Mehdi Hasan, and the Editor of Private Eye, Ian Hislop. And of course, here in the splendour of St George's Hall, our audience waiting to put their questions. Let's have the first question tonight from Georgia O'Brien, please.
Can the government really have a business secretary who believes that capitalism kills competition? This
is a quote from what Vince Cable said yesterday at the Liberal Party conference, that capitalism kills competition. Ian Hislop.
Well, I think it was a bit naughty of Vince to suggest that we were going to get an amazing Marxist diatribe from Red Vince by giving the speech out beforehand. What happened is Vince said that he thought the banks hadn't behaved awfully well. Huge roar from the audience. It seemed to me a pretty moderate speech. What I hope is that, having said that they are spivs and need controlling, you will actually do it. Mm-hmm. That's what we haven't seen yet. Mm-hmm.
John Redwood, you're on record as saying that the United Kingdom should drop anti-banker rhetoric. What did you make of what your colleague, not your colleague because you're not in government, but the member of the coalition government said yesterday?
Well, I was very happy with the policy he set out. He said he's going to consult on whether we can make companies more democratic and whether we can have less damage to competition in the marketplace. Two things I entirely agree with. I'm not quite sure what the problem is over capitalism. I think if Vince asked himself what capitalism's ever done for Vince, he might realise it's provided his suit, tie, shirt, breakfast, dinner, lunch, his house, his car, and all the taxes that provide the public services. Apart from that, I agree, Vince, capitalism hasn't done a great deal. But I think what Vince and I are united about is believing that we can only get out of this crisis by growth, and a lot of the growth has to come from the private sector. We desperately need a lot more jobs. We need a pro-enterprise, pro-business government, and I look forward to Vince being the voice for business within that government.
And do you think the tone of his remarks was damaging in the way that many people in business and industry seem to have taken it to be?
I don't think many people have. I think I had about 16 requests to say something unhelpful about Vince's remarks. I saw no need to do so. It seemed to me that the policy content was fine, and I want this government to succeed and have a proper private sector-led recovery, so I wasn't drawn into silly comments. I think it was a media attempt to draw a storm.
Oh, really? Ming Campbell, not the language I would have used. Lord Digby-Jones is inside the tent as Secretary of State for Business. He shouldn't behave like a Liberal campaigner. Come on.
It was a Liberal Democrat conference, for heaven's sake. He wanted to be popular with it. Apparently that sort of thing goes down well there.
Well, apparently the public aren't that keen on the banking crisis either, I gather.
I don't think any of us are.
Amanda, you sir. Yes.
But a lot of us think the regulators made a huge mistake and brought the house down.
You sir.
How are you going to have a private sector-led recovery when the banks aren't lending?
Okay. Mehdi Hasan, what did you make of capitalism kills competition? And should he be business secretary if he says it?
I was intrigued on Tuesday night when I heard a hyperventilating reporter on the BBC say that the business secretary was about to attack capitalism for killing competition. I thought for a moment, to borrow a phrase, that Mr. Cable was going to go from Mr. Bean to Stalin in his zeal for revolutionary communism, and yet he delivered a rather, obvious speech and knocking the bankers and saying that bankers have messed up and they need to be controlled, and quoting Adam Smith on people getting together to con the public from the business world. And in the end, you see that this is a man, a Lib Dem cabinet minister, giving a speech to rather left-wing Lib Dem party members who are not that keen, perhaps, on some of the things this coalition is doing. So what does he do? He becomes Comrade Vince, takes some pot shots at the bankers and gets lots and lots of applause, which is fine. My problem is talk is cheap. This coalition has done very little to actually rein in bankers' pay and bankers' bonuses and bankers' recklessness. And Vince, let's be under no illusions. With the greatest of respect to Vince Cable, he's not a lefty. I think he said it himself in a speech, I'm not some sort of socialist. He's not a socialist. He's lefty cover for the coalition. He is the foil for Cameron and Osborne. He is the useful business secretary behind which the Chancellor and the Prime Minister can cut public services and benefits to the poorest and most vulnerable members of the society. Okay. While the bankers carry on.
Okay, Vince Cable, your lefty cover.
No, I was making a serious point. Of course we want a private sector recovery. Business has got to lead it, and John was absolutely right. That's our priority. But there is good business and bad business, and there's good business practice and there's bad business practice. I mean, I've been in this city now for several days. I was around the city centre yesterday, and the development of Liverpool was led by John Lewis. Right, now this is a company that thinks long-term, looks after its customers, looks after its employees. I went yesterday to Ellesmere Port, to the Vauxhall plant. Right? This is a company that thinks long-term, it kept going in the recession, didn't stop its training, worked with the unions to keep its company going. Right? That is good business. That's what we want in this country. But there's been far too many activities that are not of that kind. We have people thinking in very short-term terms, causing massive disruption, takeovers that actually reduce value, they don't increase it. And, of course, much of the discussion centres on the banking community. Not all bankers are villains. You know, many of them performed very responsibly and very sensibly. Many of them didn't, and they caused an economic catastrophe. And what this government is now doing, we've been in office a few months, is trying to put in place various elements. One of them is to make the banking system safe so that we don't have this catastrophe again, regulate it properly. Another, as the gentleman from the floor pointed out, is to make sure it actually lends to business, because the banks are crucifying large numbers of small companies that can't get credit on reasonable terms. And,
With respect, you're doing it again. You say they're not lending and people clap. Why aren't you making them lend? What have you done to stop bankers' bonuses? You got rid of the bonus tax. You didn't extend the bonus tax. You haven't done any of the things the Liberal Democrats said they would do, stopping cash bonuses, stopping bonuses at board level. You haven't done any of those things.
If you want to give a brief reference to one or two things we have done in the short period that we've been in office, one of which is to tighten up the regulatory system so that banks hold more capital, so they're safe. George Osborne introduced a tax on bank balance sheets, which is, again, raising revenue, but also gets the banks to pay insurance to the taxpayer for the fact that ultimately they're underwritten by the state.
But he's right that you haven't done the things that he's describing. There's no
and even the levy is a tiny levy. The IMF said it should have been triple the size.
Caroline It's higher than any other Western country.
Vince Cable, I'll come back to you. Caroline Flint.
Well, the last Labour government raised in 5 months £3.5 billion on bankers' bonuses. The plans in the coalition government is to raise, I think, £2 billion over 4 years. And to be honest, I think Vince and others, including Nick Clegg, were trying to appeal to their audience at this conference. But, you know, what I find difficult is when Vince talks about tackling the excesses in the corporate sector, in which I would agree with him, and it doesn't mean that all the corporate sector is bad. What I find disingenuous is the fact he's also signed up to a budget which is taking money out of our economy, affecting both the public and private sector, making businesses more cautious about keeping people in work and taking people on, making banks more cautious about lending money, putting taxes like VAT on people who can least afford to do it. That isn't progressive, it's regressive. And this is the problem for the Liberal Democrats. They can't make their mind up where they are. And the difficulty in all this is we came out of recession, and now everyone is talking about going back into recession, including that not very left-wing organisation, the British Chambers of Commerce.
But I'll just bring in some members of the audience. You sit down there in the second row.
Vince Cable, you say that you want to have a private-led recovery. However, you also say you want to split the risky investment banks away from the retail banks. However, if you split the retail banks, the cost of capital that will go up, therefore businesses will have to cost more, and therefore the price to the consumer will cost more. How will this actually work?
In referring to that particular problem, I mean, this issue about whether traditional retail banking for you and small business should be linked together with the investment banks. I mean, the